awakening can take place in terms of three sort of facets of realization. They can happen in any order, and you can have any combination of the three, 1, 2, or all three preferably. So the first one is the realization that there's no person here. So that normally occurs as quite a moment, like, oh my goodness. It's often a very clear realization. When I look for the person, all I find is experience. When I look for the person, all I find are a bunch of sensations, hearing, seeing, and feeling. But where's the identity? The identity that I once considered me, I realize are a bunch of thoughts. They're a bunch of memories. This person did this and this person did that, but for some reason the connection has been cut. The identification, whatever this is, whatever you are, and the thoughts and the memories is no longer intact. So that you realize, and it's quite a shock, and that's an awakening. Like I've said before, if you wake up to the fact that there's no person here, that constitutes a full awakening or semi-awakening. But if you are only realizing that there's no person here and that you don't really know who you are, instead of knowing yourself as universal consciousness or awareness or the one, you just have this empty blank space now where the person was. Although there's no person here, what am I? And in this space that you've created, in this gap where you don't quite know what you are, a lot of these patterns that you had as a separate self can keep arising.
You're listening to the Nonduality podcast. This is Nick Hyam from nisargayoga.com. Today I'm joined again by Colette Davie. Colette's Instagram handle is That Beyond Duality.
I woke up to this no person thing, and it was dead clear that there was absolutely no one here. Experiences were occurring to no one. But the patterns, these strong patterns, were still presenting themselves, and months were spent in that position. So when I see other people, like say that they can clearly see it's just sensations arising, but they're still waking up depressed, or they're still crying themselves to sleep, but they're the observer of it, that really inspires me to share what I've learned. Whenever someone comes to me with an issue that's a problem of the separate self, and they don't have the perspective of awareness, and they haven't integrated that, you cannot meet a person on the level of absolute awareness. It's a personal problem, and it must be dealt with in that sense, in a way, on the personal level. So if an apparent person is really suffering, nothing is going to get them out of that loop as easily as calling a friend or having a beer or something like that, because they need to be met on the level of the suffering. Otherwise, it's just creating a resistance. If you're going into the suffering as awareness, that's completely different. The experience as a whole will not be suffering, and that's how you know where you stand. So if you face some sort of depression or a very deep emotion and you're polarizing it as bad, and you're wanting to get rid of it, that's already how you know you're not standing in your true self. You might be under this sort of spiritual label of witnessing the depression or witnessing the strong emotion, but like I said, it's not enough, because you're now creating a new, more subtle identity of resistance that you're calling awareness, that you're calling the witness of suffering. It's just a little proxy ego, really. So you can keep being anxious, you can keep having experiences of depression and heartbreak and lack and feeling lonely. And it's because a new, more subtle, separate identity has formed in the place of you not knowing you thinking you're not a person. So the first step, or the first facet, is realizing you're not a person in the way that you thought. Then the second facet is realizing that your awareness or consciousness, whatever you would like to call it. And then the third step is integrating the knowledge of the fact that your awareness into the mind and the body. And as long as there isn't an equilibrium that these three facets aren't full, each of them is not completely understood and seen through, you're going to encounter continual resistance. Your being is going to continually say this is not complete, something is being misunderstood, and that'll be represented by suffering of some form, whether reliving stuff from the past or just unable to shake these habits, unable to change the perspective, because you haven't completely seen through each of those aspects. In realizing that your awareness, once you've realized there's no person, that's a big leap as well, because you're now filling that previously empty gap where the person was. You're now filling it with an awareness or a consciousness label. And it's much more subtle, because there's a whole spiritual thing about this. The teaching says that if you realize your awareness, then that is not a new identity. That is an ending point. That's what it implies, and that's what the mind gets from the teaching. So it now says, okay, I'm not a person, I'm awareness. But then fails to actually investigate the characteristics of awareness. So awareness takes the place of the person. So then you keep experiencing all these patterns, and people wonder what is going on, because I now know I'm not a person, and I know I'm aware. Why am I still suffering? Why is the body, why is the vessel still suffering? Why am I still the observer of suffering? And it's because awareness or consciousness has formed a subtle identity. You haven't realized that it is completely devoid of any human qualities. You haven't explored it in its power. And that's where the third facet comes in. The way that you integrate the qualities of awareness into the body and the mind, so that you are left completely identityless as consciousness or as awareness. What I found to be particularly helpful in the third facet and exploring the characteristics of this new thing that you've realized you are, is when you're faced with something, if you're faced with lack, look for the trait of polarity in your true nature. So you're now directly confronting lack. Investigate your true nature in the form of, where is this opposite of what I'm feeling? Is awareness lacking? This presence that I feel, whether it's in the form of the witness or the consciousness, is it lacking? If you're confronted with this feeling of insignificance, being small, ask directly and polarize it and say, is awareness insignificant or small? Notice the vastness of your true nature in contrast to this separate self pattern. And in a way, that dynamic, although it's a sort of a tool, it manages to dilute the effects of the experience. If you're feeling extremely negatively polarized, the inherently positive aspect of awareness, if investigated thoroughly, will simply wash over that negative experience and often leave you feeling quite neutral. And the feeling might not even go away, but you are now sort of seeing through it.
So experiences are still experienced, yet you know that you are this unlimited, unbounded experiencer. not apart from your experiences. They're not a threat. You're not in conflict with experiences, no matter their flavour, no matter their texture. They are of your nature, so there's nothing to get away from.
Yes, you only go to war with something if you feel threatened by it. Even on a human level, humans only fight with other humans or things that they're threatened by. So as soon as you're resisting something, you know you're threatened by it, which means that you don't know yourself. Because awareness can never be threatened. These emotions pale in comparison to the vastness and the power and the inherent strength and resilience of awareness. It simply almost overlooks them. It's almost as if these humanly extremely strong things are rendered insignificant. And that's when you know you're facing your emotions and these experiences as your true self. When you look at them with, as Rupert Spira has said, a benevolent indifference, just a loving acceptance and a letting go, that's when you know you're in your power.
That acceptance and that releasing is automatic, it's effortless. If there's effort involved, then you're coming from a position, you're coming from an identity. If you're trying to let go, if you're trying to allow, then you haven't recognized the fact that you, by your nature, your very nature, hold and release all of your manifestations effortlessly. It's easeful and natural.
Yes, exactly. If you find yourself now trying to explore the characteristics of your true nature in order to get rid of something or as some form of resistance, that is just another case of resistance, and it's not going to get you anywhere. And that's where the phone a friend, have a beer thing comes into play, because the teaching doesn't talk about it that much, but it's easier to explore your true nature when the mind, when the human is in a state of equilibrium. It's not always so easy when you're in that thought loop and you're in complete identification and complete resistance, because any effort is just pushing it further away. And when we're peaceful, it's much easier because we're not bracing. We're not constantly trying to protect ourselves. So if the human is in a happier state after having a beer or calling a friend or whatever, then they can go and explore their true nature when they're sort of re-established a little bit, just on the human level. And then the qualities start to open up. So it's almost like I would advise, in your spare time, when you're happiest, explore true nature. Don't leave it for the moment when you're desperate and crying and feeling alone. It's almost like that's not helpful. Do it beforehand. Do it when it calls to you, when there's a loving willingness to explore what you are. And then that practice of exploration will bleed over into these negative experiences. And you won't have to do the work because, like you said, awareness will just meet itself in that experience. There'll be nothing to avoid and nothing to resist. Awareness is simply meeting an aspect of itself.
By default, you know you're aware. You may feel that awareness is a product of the body or mind. You may believe that it's your awareness, that it's located. But with some inquiry, you realize that it isn't personal and actually accommodates any sense of self, any experience. But often many stay on that level of not a person, just awareness. I'm this kind of empty, void-like screen. And the flip side of that is that it's fullness, this sort of visceral, palpable positivity or subjectivity, full of itself, full of these qualities. And these qualities aren't absolute in their own right. Yes, it seems, the best we can say, it seems like love, it seems like oneness, but they are just ways to point to something that can't be said. We could say that awareness is a quality of your true nature, just as much as connectedness is, or love, safety, clarity, peace, or bliss. These are just signposts. We don't know. We can't say, we can't comprehend what it is. These are the deeper characteristics, as opposed to the sort of superficial distortions that constitute the sense of self, the ego, and its suffering and seeking. So it isn't just empty, it's also full.
Yes, when I see people stick to this witness thing, I almost want to shake them and say, but are you satisfied? Are you satisfied? Be honest. Don't throw a spiritual blanket over this. Answer me. And if they're honest, they will say no, they are not satisfied. They are still suffering, because the void concept and the emptiness concept and the neutrality concept is not enough. You need the full view of this thing for it to really, really change the life of the person. Anything the mind projects onto it, it will reflect back like a mirror. So if we project awareness, we will actually see our whole experience as aware. If we project love, it mirrors back love. And then we're like, oh, we're love. Everything is love. But it's actually a mirror of its functions in a way. And inherently isn't anything. Inherently is empty of it all. But that's why it's so amazing, because it's practically a blank canvas. It's the playground of experience.
Exactly. Yeah, and so this world of duality is a sort of celebration. It's a sort of party. It's a work of art in the sense that it's pure potential. It doesn't lack anything. It's the fullness of everything.
That's what's so interesting about the neti process. You think you're discarding things. You think you're saying, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not. But it reverses on itself and shows you that you're everything you previously denied. It's the complete paradox. It turns it on you and says, hey, everything you netied a couple years ago, that's you. It's completely untouched potentiality onto which anything can be projected. It's God's canvas. If an artist looks at a blank canvas, they don't see lack, they see potential. And that's what this thing is in the mind of what we call God. It's the vessel. It's the vessel for creativity and expression. And when you confront it directly, you're just simply blown away, because it's nothing like what you thought. You've crossed all of these labels, and you've been beingness, and you've been oneness, and you've been love and peace and bliss and awareness and the witness and consciousness and the dream. And then, oh my goodness, this thing is holding all of that as a beautiful expression of everything going on. If you stay just on that threshold of I am this consciousness and not everything else, that is going to show in experience. That unhappiness, it's like your being is not in equilibrium, because there's still a subtle duality. Even though it's super subtle, there's still something you haven't picked up, that you haven't taken back from the neti. And that'll keep replaying.
There aren't some things that aren't it, that aren't perfect manifestations of it. That thing that isn't a thing, that isn't an it. And all things are you. It's not like there are some things that aren't reality. Do you ever find this thing called unreality? All you ever find is life. You never find life's opposite, because it doesn't have an opposite. Only in concepts. And what are concepts but the same outpouring of this power?
Exactly. If you're in any state of negation, if even the slightest thing in you says it's not this, then it's not fully clear. If you can look at something and say that's not what I am, or an emotion or a sensation or an experience, if you close your eyes and it's different to what's here when your eyes are open, the encouragement is there to inquire further, because no matter what appears, no matter what moves, whether terrible or marvelous or magnificent or hideous or dark or light, nothing changes. I think Adyashanti has said, everything that's not truth will continue to be brought toward truth indefinitely until it's confronted and seen through.
Yeah, so you keep pushing away whatever it is, a certain pattern, or you believe you're pushing it away. You're not really, but that's your experience. You're pushing it away, and then eventually, when it comes up again, as it inevitably does, comes back into the light of awareness, and you start to explore its nature as awareness. You realize its aliveness, you realize its beingness, you realize its awareness itself, and it's that thing, whatever it is, that seemed like a threat, that seemed like non-life, unreality, not you, is given permission to be, and therefore is integrated into experience, and you see its potential. It's like the wave that was excluded is suddenly allowed to be part of the ocean. And so that frees up so much energy. It's like you're not cutting things off.
Yeah, that experience comes from this extremely necessary aspect of humility. If you are telling yourself you're something and you keep pressing this label onto it and denying that permission slip, you're going to suffer. And I see it mostly in the form of the following, which I really wanted to raise today. Somebody said that they're awake because they're not suffering, they're the witness of suffering. And so the mind uses the teaching to appropriate it for its own gain. So it keeps you suffering, but then it repeats all the literature you've read and says, oh no, but the end of suffering is the witness of suffering, because then technically I'm not suffering. So the process is complete. There's no problem. I just need to somehow learn to live with this horrible feeling as the witness. But that's what everyone else seems to be doing. So I must be fully enlightened. I must be fully awake. And you have to honor your instinct, and you have to honor your intuition in this case, because you have to be completely honest. And only, even just in that honesty, in that moment of honesty, you'll see something open. Like you said, a permission slip will present itself, because it's waiting, it's almost bursting open, waiting for you to say, okay, maybe I don't know myself fully, so that it can overflow and become part of the ocean again, like you said. And it's very difficult, especially in the community of so-called spiritual seekers. None of these minds, none of these spiritual minds want to admit that they experience any human quality. So many are in denial of it. And it's because they have no choice. If they don't deny it, they're going to suffer, because they're in a duality. If they were to release this, be humble, realize that they're facing suffering as a separate awareness self, every step along this path is necessary. So you have to deny everything first, and you have to establish yourself as this label of awareness first, because it bypasses the mind's mechanism. So it's totally valid and extremely necessary, and one can rest there however long you want. And it's a completely valid step. Completely, like you said, it presents a whole new freedom, a whole new dimension of something that's not struggling as much. That's why each of these facets is an awakening in itself.
Yeah, true. And then you realize there's nothing to be liberated from. There's nothing to escape. There's nothing that isn't you, as we were saying. There's no danger, there's no threat. I am everything. It's that path of inclusion, a path of love. Everything that I manifest as awareness, everything that I bring into being, I love effortlessly, spontaneously, not in a subject-object relationship, but seamlessly, no thing is apart from me. I am all things, and that is love. Yeah. And that's where the true healing takes place and the true integration takes place. Not in the I am no thing, just the witnessing. The healing, integration, stabilization can't really take place there. It comes through love.
Concepts initially, like the 1980 process, I'm not this, I'm not that, and realizing you're aware and realizing you're the witness, those are sort of conceptual realms. You're playing in the realm of the mind. The healing takes place on a very, very formless level. It's almost intangible. You work with sensations in the body, and you seep the awareness or the consciousness into every micro area where there's any tension. And one can't even conceive of what's really happening there. It's this beautiful, formless, almost magical process. And that's what you get to if you just push yourself a little bit beyond the label of awareness, beyond the concept comfort. It becomes this full exploration of the body and the experience and the environment, and they all start merging into one another.
That's it. And the magic is that effortless inclusivity, realizing that that thing that was a threat to your existence is not a threat, it's you. If pain is no longer a threat and is of your nature, then mysteriously, like that wave relaxing into the ocean, that pain is seen for what it is, and it's no longer pain. You recognize its nature, but it has no form.
It's a unity belonging to no one. We've all tried to project a concept of that's me, that's me, that's me onto different aspects of experience. And it doesn't sink in because there's still an implied duality. If there's a you, there's a problem. There is just this. And you realize everything is the formless this. Even form is formless thisness. Pain is as solid as this microphone. They become completely same substance. And you can't describe what it is. But why would you be threatened by some more of yourself washing over you?